Goeiedag, good day, fellow South Africans and citizens of the world.
I've been looking around for salvation. I've been looking around for the truth. All around me I see frustration, and I looked all over till I found you. I sit and listen to your stories, and you're telling me, please don't worry. A lot in this world you should know, and love in life is where you should go. If you're looking for somewhere to go, if you're looking for someone to know, if you're looking for someone to guide you, then love in life will guide you. I know that life outside is so
Goeienaand, good evening, fellow South Africans and citizens of the world, and welcome to tonight's live stream. Well, it's an interesting subject to have on the Easter weekend, but it's a very, very important and relevant one, because there are now paid gangs of hitmen in South Africa, and that's our subject tonight, is the Inkabi, as they're called in Zulu. And before we get our guest Eugene Engelbrecht on, I just want to show you a map of South Africa which shows the number of recorded murders that took place 4 or 5 years ago in South Africa. Let's have a look at that. Now you can see a huge concentration in KwaZulu-Natal, which is really not surprising, as you will see tonight, the relevance of Zulu hitmen or Zulu Inkabi. And just to add a bit of meat to the bone on that, I'm going to show you a short video clip, which is of a fellow who's got a business in the Natal Midlands town of Dundee, where he provides armed men or security with AK-47s to protect the municipal councillors from hitmen. Let's have a look at that.
Making a grand entrance with the swagger of a leading character in an action-packed thriller, this video shows Dundee-based businessman Sipho Ngcobo arriving for a multi-million rand municipal security tender briefing, complete with rifle-carrying bodyguards clad in camouflage clothing. But he says his rather unusual entrance was not meant to intimidate municipal officials or his competitors.
Uma nguthi ngase kube khona ke mhlambe omunye ongathi ene bekusatshiswe izikhulu zamasipala zingasabiswa kanjani izikhulu zamasipala uyimina negenge yami tax team bebe vele bebegadwa igenge yakaqhumkufu amabodyguard akaqhumkufu then ke lokho ngikuthatha njengokuthi umuntu lo mhlambe ofisa ukuzakhela nje udumo ngendlela engesiyo okunye ukuthi ene thina njengoqhumkufa leya ndawo esiya kuyona lapha ya indawo vele iclient yami ekufuna mina mangiya kuyo ngiveze futhi neservice ukuthi ene uqhumkufa ukhona uya exista then hayi ukuthi ngoba khona umuntu esimsubside.
Ngcobo's security company already provides VIP protection to Endumeni municipality's top brass. His current contract is on a month-to-month basis. The tender briefing he was attending is for a long-term contract. The businessman says his security was beefed up after receiving death threats for his crime-fighting work in the area.
Ngapaka imoto yami ngahamba ngayinyukhasela ngathi mangifika lapho ngathola ukuthi imoto yami ene kwakhona abantu about 15 wabantu ababephethe ibhama abasurrounda imoto yami. Namhlanje angibazi labo bantu bawo ubani. I-question ithi kube bangithola kwakuzokwenzakalani. Then ke ilezo zinto ezenza ukuthi ngicine ngine security for 24 hours kodwa futhi engiphinde ngisebenze nayo nami uma kunenkinga yama client noma mhlambe i-members zomphakathi uma sibona ubugebengu benzeka then siya acta there and there.
Ngobo's security business also operates in the taxi industry. The unstable Endumeni municipality has been plagued by infighting. Its mayor Siboniso Mbata was arrested for allegedly conspiring to assassinate its speaker Bongiwe Mbata Makhathini. The IFP has since recalled both leaders following an embarrassing spat. Siphamandla Goge, Dandi.
Okay, that just gives you a little bit of background to the situation in South Africa, and of course that was in the town of Dundee, a little town. I remember it well. I lived in Escort, which is quite close to Dundee. Now, just before I get Eugene Engelbrecht on, I just want you to please hold his father in your thoughts and prayers, because he is not well, and yeah, just if you wouldn't mind over this Easter, just saying a prayer for Eugene Engelbrecht's family and in particular for his father. Let me get our guest on. Here we go. Hi, Eugene.
Scott, good evening. How are you?
Excellent, thank you. Excellent. Thank you so much for joining us. I understand the personal situation. Really appreciate your joining us, and it is a very, very important subject.
No, thank you for having me, and for the viewers that were interested in our topic tonight. No, it's appreciated.
Yeah.
And yeah, thank you for the opportunity.
Now, tonight we're going to be talking about a very disturbing situation in South Africa, which involves hitmen, the Inkabi, yes. the people yes. who are paid to take out other people.
Correct.
Now, you know an awful lot about this subject, so I'm going to be basically asking you questions about the entirety of hitmen and so on. First off, how do it's largely Zulus who are involved with the hitman trade, isn't it?
Put it this way, Scott, I think it does cross boundaries in terms of culture and or tribal boundaries. The topics I'm going to be discussing with tonight is because I have first-hand access to them. Quite a few of the scenes we'll talk about, I've actually been on those scenes personally. So, you know, we can talk with a bit of clarity and with a bit of what's the word I'm looking for? It's reality, you know.
Yeah.
But if we generally look at the hitmen that are moving around, I can honestly tell you, for example, in some of the townships around call it the Bluff or the Southern Durban area, they
like Umlazi?
Negative Umlazi, and that would generally still fall within your gambit of your more Zulu ethnic type of hitman. But when you start moving into places like Wentworth and one of those areas, specifically Wentworth, we've known where they've flown guys up from the Cape,
wow,
to come and do hits, you know, within the coloured community there. So it's generally wherever there's gangs and there's money, and there's a need to basically get rid of your competition or your threat or to expand your business or whatever your motive may be. It's available. It's there. It's not that narrowed down to any one specific group or culture at this point. It's becoming its own culture. It's getting its own life, and it's getting its own impetus in the country right now, as we'll reveal through our discussion tonight. So it sort of breaches all boundaries, all borders, and it's, in my opinion, my humble opinion, it's driven by greed and money.
Right. Now, look, it was interesting because Ruyter said in a recent video that there are cartels at Eskom, and he says one of those cartels has 60 to 70 hitmen who get paid. They're actually they get a salary, and they take out competition, as you said. They probably take out political enemies. They take out whistleblowers. What do you say about these professional hitmen who are basically on a payroll?
I think it's happening a lot more than we realize. I'm aware of what Mr. Ruyter said there in his interview, and that's actually contained in some of the articles that were put out in the press after the discussion. Must understand the skill set that these guys have and the nature of the organizations that they're now involved in. I'm not too sure if you've ever watched any or read or researched anything to do with the old narco cartels, specifically the days of people like Pablo Escobar and these guys. He ran it the same way. He had his really trusted right-hand men that were also his hitmen. They worked for him. They were on a retainer. They moved his product. They were his runners. And then when they needed to do something, they were basically brought in and done. So I think it's pretty much on the same sort of basis, and I don't think it's that far-fetched to believe that quite a few of these, specifically more your economic gangs, if we may call them that, are actually keeping these guys on retainers. So it's very real.
Wow. Okay. So let's talk about a hitman now. They're basically gunmen for hire, and you can actually, probably anywhere in South Africa, if you've got the right contacts, you can literally go and pay a hitman to take out anyone. Do you want to take us through how much they charge and anything related to that will give people some background on this process?
Sure, Scott. And if you don't mind, I'd like to elaborate a little bit on the sort of the dynamic of the hitman as well. You know,
sure.
in terms of fit in. You know, I've done some. I've taken some time to watch a few videos and to see what's been done, and there was one that was actually put on SABC3, one of the national carriers in South Africa, where they were alleging to actually be interviewing Inkabis, or the Inkabi Zulu word for hitman, assassin. That's the street name they're running on, as we've discussed, Inkabis. So they're talking about they're actually sitting and they're chatting to these guys, and these guys are busy telling them how they work and how they function. Now there's a red flag for me immediately, because if a journalist can find the Inkabis to sit and have tea with them and find out how they work, I'd love to know where our crime intelligence structure is, that they can't find them. That's the first question, but that one we'll elaborate on as we go. But once you look at the way these guys come in and operate, and we've seen, for example, the guys will come in, they'll do for a hit in Natal. And I mean, the police are still on the scene, and those guys are already on their way back to where they came from. It could be Gauteng, it could be anywhere else. They're not actually resident, but they are in a pool of accessible people. The second thing is the nature of the skills. You know, I'm sure as the viewers can see, I'm no longer a spring chicken, but we're doing it for some time. And you know, earlier years, we used to joke, you know, like if you got an Inkabi or someone shooting at you, just stand still, because they were notoriously bad shots. They didn't have access to training, didn't have access to guns, ranges, ammunition to actually sharpen their skills. Secondly, they also never had a pool of people that were, and I'm being cautious as I say this, but we know that there have been SAPS members caught in teams attempting farm murders. There's been SAPS members caught on duty with cash in transits. We had a robbery in my hometown, or attempted robbery not too long back, where the guy just walked up and snatched the container of money out of the courier guy's hand, not the courier, the cash in transit guy's hand. And this guy was actually an instructor in our police task force. We know how highly trained those people are. So there is a pool of very highly trained people that are out there. And we do know that if we look at the accuracy of the shooting, you know, to drive and shoot is a skill. And to drive and shoot a grouping that you can basically fit a sight plate over, trust me, is a big skill. And this is kind of what we're seeing out there. So although the guys are out there and they're ready, we can see you have a sort of a, so we call it a tiered structure where for a lower rate of money, some guys are saying it starts at 40,000 Rand. That's sort of been in the press lately, kind of what is being bandied about loosely on the streets. That could be definitely money for a much higher caliber of hit. We know of guys that have been taken out for 2,000 to 5,000 Rand. You know, the economics of the country are such, and there's so many illegal firearms, and there's suddenly a proliferation of ammunition, which we can't quite understand, because almost every night you can hear gunshots coming out of the area. You can hear automatic gunfire. You hear single shot fire. And the question I ask myself is, I'm sitting on my veranda listening to this. Where is our resources in crime intelligence, national intelligence, these sort of organizations that have actually had resources on the ground to find out where are these guns and who's exactly shooting them? It can't be that hard. I know for a fact it's not that hard. It's just the lack of a will. That's a different topic, but I just wanted to put that in there.
Sure.
But coming back to the recruiting and the sourcing, in a previous discussion, we discussed how organized crime and the money that's available in organized crime is definitely changing from opportunity to a career opportunity, where young people are actually striving to become involved or to be accepted into these bigger mafia type structures that are going out there because of the power and the money. And when we talk about power and money, when you can go and take out a policeman because he's getting too close, such as Colonel Schalkenier, or you just go and kill a whistleblower that was coming a little bit too close to burning you for a 322,000 Rand funny order in the SAPS. You know, we know recently there's a lady that's gone into hiding over that. We know what happened to Babita Dekoran, who was working for the health department. So nobody is sacred. So the access and availability of these people is such that through the right context, through the right structures, be it political, be it law enforcement, or just be it normal criminal gangsterism, they can be obtained, they can be fetched through word of mouth. The accessibility of skilled guys is governed by money. They can pay anything up to R1 million for a high-end target, possibly even more. So you can imagine for a hitman that's out there to be able to make $1 million in 4 weeks or 6 weeks. You know, spend our life playing lotto, we won't make that kind of money. You know, so very quick money, high risk, high return, easy availability, protection from the power structures that task you. It's not a bad job right now in South Africa.
Yeah. Well, look, you mentioned that woman who dobbed in the other police. I think it was in the Free State in particular. I actually had her on a live stream about 2 months ago, and apparently she's now skipped the country because they're hitmen after her. And one of the things that she said was that the police were not providing her with any security.
Correct. And if you remember what happened with Colonel Schalkenier as well, he was investigating a very, very dangerous matter of arms that were taken in by SAPs from civilians that were meant for destruction, that were finding their way out onto the Cape Flats. We're talking like 16,000 firearms that disappeared. And he started investigating other SAPS members about the missing firearms and so on. This is documented on the media, so we're not pointing fingers at anybody. We're just regurgitating what anybody can read if they want to go and see it.
Right.
And in that process, I mean, he was basically assassinated just because he was getting too close to those kind of structures. So when it came down to the investigation, but where was his bodyguards and where was his protection? It turned out that somewhere down the line, just before his assassination, the decision was made he no longer needs bodyguards. And when he motivated for bodyguards and to get some level of protection back, the people within the crime intelligence structure he had to motivate too included some of the people he was actually investigating. Bottom line is he got nobody, and he was alone on the street when he got shot. So I would go with her. Definitely she has had no protection. She's been strung out there to dry, to the point where I think the best thing she could have done, and I hope they've done it properly, is to actually just get her. I don't know where she is. I hope they don't either. Do you actually get her out the country and just keep her safer?
Not just talking about the South African police service. I mean, we know that their reputation has just tanked so badly. It's just shocking. But the Minister of Police, Bekesele, in recent weeks, he actually attended a funeral in Durban, which involved someone who was in an Inkabi. What does that say about the involvement of the police in this criminal industry?
Interesting that you go there, Scott. We'll go through a few timelines now to just sort of give an idea of the proliferation and the timelines between hits generally on the street, where it's almost daily to sometimes more than once a day. Now, in this scenario, there was a very let's call it notorious, is probably the right word, a notorious person that had established a very powerful narcotics structure. And him and the wife had been kind of ruling for some time within their area, their space, doing what they did best. And there was broad daylight, Ilumgeni, so we call it really, west of Durban. One bright morning, shots rang out. The wife, himself, and their 9-year-old daughter came under a hail of bullets. The wife and the husband basically didn't make it, but the little daughter was chronic, but she didn't see the sun come up the next day. She was about 9 years old. Okay, that would be what the guy known as Brandon Puff. I'm trying to think how to pronounce his name. Caligula Chan. Suddenly there was a lot of concern as to who had taken this guy out. I would almost say more concerned about who had taken him out than who had taken out a lot of other people within the vicinity, within a 3-week window, up or down. And last weekend, the news broke of how SAPS had found a vehicle with the 2 suspects, or suspect vehicle with 2 suspects in, that they deemed to have been involved in the shooting of this drug lord. Let's call him what he was. And there was a bit of an exchange. They managed to apprehend the guys, who then allegedly took them and showed them where the shooters of this family were actually allegedly in hiding, or whatever they were doing. All of a sudden there, a huge shootout erupted. Now, I see the press has kept the names out of the circulation, so I would assume there's a good reason for that. So if you don't mind, I'm going to do the same tonight. I'm not going to mention who the guys were that were in the flat that got taken out. It was 5 guys. But what you had was 2 really well-reputed top dog underworld, whatever you want to call them, warlords or Mafia boss heads or whatever, that were now dead. One were taken out by rivals. One was taken out in an arrest by SAPS where there was return fire. One of the officers allegedly also took a shot into his into the bulletproof vest, which saved his life and so forth, which is great. But now we come down and I'll ask you this. We're talking about, remember I was affiliated to SAPS for many, many years, and I have many good friends, and I know many members within the organization that I would still trust with my life. So I'm not knocking everybody and everything that works for SAPS, but as an organization, the South African Police Services has become so infiltrated, and I'll state this for the record, and whoever wants to take me on is welcome. I'll put the facts on the table. It's become very infiltrated with money, drugs. I'm talking money from drugs. I'm talking about being in the pocket of vehicle theft syndicates and so forth. So brings you to the point I want to make to you, Scott. Now we have the second shootout where this 5 people get shot. That's in the morning sometime. I think it's around 10, 11. I'm under correction. The scene gets cordoned off. Nothing really material happens while we wait for the Minister of Police to be flown in and to personally attend that scene. And the provincial commissioner appears at the same scene. And I'm like, why? What makes these guys so special? In the process, our Minister of Police clarifies for those that are listening to the young lady on the ENCA news there, that these were people who were the suspects for the matter where the people were shot in Umgeni area, namely Opaf and his wife and the daughter. Now think about, okay, so he said that, what's the difference? Basically, our Minister of Police has potentially started a massive turf war because now both gangs know who shot who.
Yeah.
It's that simple.
Yeah.
So he's basically put it out there on TV. Hey, Puff, your guys, guess what? It was this guy's guys that came and took you out. And now, by the way, these guys, that guys took you out. And, being quite close to the ground, we had, I believe, information that I'm happy to accept with the sources and where it comes from, that of the fellows that were then apprehended and who are alleged to have given information as to where these guys were, there's already been reprisals against their families in their homes in the rural areas. So this is going to be huge in terms of, we don't have a one-headed snake here. We've got a multi-headed snake. So when you cut the one head off, be ready for the other 5 that are going to come back and have a good old go at you. So, when we talk about that level of involvement and we talk about the need for our esteemed minister, to fly into a scene of 5 bodies that have been long reputed or alleged to have been reputed within drugs and all sorts of other things, Inkabis, guns, you name it. They can't close the scene of till he's been there and had his say, like it's some sort of victory. But just the week before, a taxi guy with his guards, all 5 of them were shot within 400 meters of each other in Tongaat. I didn't see no helicopters and ministers landing there.
Yeah.
So obviously it didn't have the same value or the same affiliated value to want to actually go to that trouble. It's more questions than answers.
Yeah. Now, before we move on more about the Inkabi and some of the cases of what's happened, I just want to pick up on something that you said, and I understand that in the education department in South Africa, senior positions, when they're offered, the successful, always black candidate actually pays a substantial amount of money to get that position. So in other words, it is not a position where the best person gets a job. It's the one who pays the interviewer the most money who gets the job. Now, does the same thing happen when it comes to the South African Police Service? Because that woman who we were talking about a moment ago, who's fled the country, her allegations were that people who had absolutely no experience were being put into senior positions in the SAPS. Do you have any comments on that?
Yeah, we do. If you actually go back to the last intake, where they were talking about they're going to bring in another 10,000 young policemen and so forth, by the time they got the numbers gelled and everybody was in college, you may or may not recall that in the South African media there was up to 1,100 members that were there, that were in, but there was no applications and nothing that were actually matching to who they were, how they got there, and what was their origins, until they suddenly found out. But these guys had paid people to actually be accepted into the whole sort of training regime and the police college thing. And there was a major problem, but again, it's gone very quiet. There's been no outcomes to that again, or any kind of feedback on what happened to those people, subsequent to that. So they had new recruits just bypassing the system. Then, on the other hand, there's if you look at the progression and procession training with INSAPs and the people that are coming in to take over new positions and so forth, and then suddenly you have somebody posing all over their Facebook and talking about how they're so proud of how they've sucked it up and made it, and they're 27 years old and they're a brigadier. People like me fall off our chairs and we break our hips and things like that, because we've got an old saying, and pardon me viewers, we used to call it the POP principle of promotion. That stands for the power of the panty, because really there's no way in hell you could go from a matriculant to a brigadier in 5 or 6 years, just for the hell of it, unless you have got some very rare skill, that you can weld underwater with a shoelace or something. I don't know what you can do to qualify for that kind of sudden promotion. So
Yeah.
there is that kind of stuff going on. There is friendship calls, there's girlfriend promotions. Let's just call a spade, there has been a lot of work done in the last few years to actually create the panels that interview and screen, the people that are now apparently applying for these promotions. Because remember, it's no longer a promotion on years or courses you do as in the old force. It's now a service, so it's management positions. So, if there's a vacancy in the HRM department, that's a lieutenant colonel and you're a captain, you can apply for the higher rank position as your next promotion. Whether you actually know anything about HR, whether you know anything about the standing orders surrounding staff control within SAPS, probably a nice to have, but it's not important. We've seen some really over the years, some interesting promotions. A point where a person is not always sure, what the criteria was in the first place. But I would back her. Long story short, Scott. Definitely, there has been promotions and people put into positions that are shocking sometimes. Like, where on earth did you come from? What do you know? What is your skill set? You must remember, even simple things like people going from a clerical background, and because they've hit the highest level of grading within the clerical, can apply to come into SAPS as a captain. So in other words, they can go from being a clerk straight into being a commissioned officer. You might say, well, that's not too bad then. Surely that's a nice progression, it's a nice promotion. Remember, once you're a captain or any kind of officer that has been appointed into that position, you now have to stand as a duty officer. If you have any scene, any rape, any murder, any shootout, any incident where your own police members have been involved in a shootout, you as the duty officer have to attend that scene and make sense of it. And what you do with that scene can be the difference between a fair decision being made on the ground or your members ending up getting criminal charges because you didn't know what you were doing. And these are the kind of things that come in onto the ground. You're getting people put into these positions with no top-up training, no short course, intermediary stuff. They go from point A to point B. They actually fill those positions for I don't know how long. They may well go on course at some point, but it's not prior to them actually taking up those posts. Hence, we find a lot of, and I'm going to throw that word a lot of, it's usually a term that you've got to be careful of, because they say, right, what is a lot of quantified? I can't give you numbers. But I can tell you from personal experience that you meet really nice people that are really just incompetent, not because they're bad people, they've just been put into the positions and no one has shown them what to do. They have no idea what to do, so they start faking it and just upsetting community members and so forth that are actually trying to get a service out of it.
Yeah. Now look, I just want to pick up on something that I was told, and that is that when these syndicates of hitmen go out and take a really big target out, what they do to cover their tracks is they actually have a friendly SAPS member who is conveniently parked in his car very close to where the incident happens, and he is then contacted to go and investigate the murder. And what he does is he screws up all the evidence so that no one can actually be charged. Have you heard about that?
Scott, to be honest with you, I haven't first-hand experienced that, specifically on any scenes where I've been. But what I can tell you is, and if you'll just humor me with this, is that we have been exposed to car theft syndicates, things like that, where guys are also, they've been hijacking, they're not scared to use guns, they shoot people to take their vehicles and so forth. And on the arrest of these people, and you start chatting to them, in inverted commas, then they'll start telling you about certain SAPS members that are on their payroll, and you say, for what? And then it's basically for tip-offs and hints of, listen, I hear them on the radio, they're coming for you now. There's a tracking company that has got signal on you. They're saying they're about 5 minutes out, and suddenly you'll find the vehicle abandoned, idling on the side of the road with the key in the ignition. And when you chat to them, they're actually giving you names. They're not even ashamed to just give you the names of who they're actually working with. So to answer your question this way, it's not unusual for organized crime to have police as part of their syndicate, because that's what organized crime is actually all about. Organized crime is getting key players onto your books to work with you, to open the doors, or to shoot them to get them out of the way if they're being obstructive. It's that simple, that you can move what you need to move from point A to point B. So it'll be very naive to believe that it's not happening.
Right. Look, I'm going to now share with the audience some of the material that you sent me. And can you see that map of the world?
I can see it, Scott.
Okay, I'm going to put that up on the screen. Can you just take us through what we're looking at here and the relevance of this to the topic we're talking about?
Sure. If we go through the amount of hits and shootings and assassinations and even kidnappings, but that'll be a discussion for another day, that's on the upsurge in South Africa at this point. It's always interesting to try and throw back to how do we compare to countries that have got history of this, specifically sort of your narco countries or your countries of political turmoil and so forth, where it is criminal elements that generally run your area, not so much your government forces. And we're saying that straight out. South Africa's in that capacity right now. So I went and pulled a few stats, and it was based on 2023, but although it was March 2023 when they were published, they had to go back to when the countries actually had stats of any material value that they could work on. So it all sort of fell back to 2018. Now we know things have picked up a lot since 2018. If you look at the SAP stats, and I'm talking about weekly stats on the ground, in COVID, these stats went a bit awry because not much happened because nobody was allowed out. So you really got to look at just prior to COVID and just after COVID to actually get any sense out of stats at this stage, which is not being done because it makes it airy-fairy and pretty. But at this point in time, we've got to go back to where we had sort of stats that were usable. So if you go back to 2018, what you've pulled up there, and you look at the rate in South Africa, this is based at homicides or killings per 100,000 population. Now, it's quite important that we stabilize that, because statistics can become a tool to make you think things are better than they are. So I specifically researched something that gives us a figure as against per 100,000 population. So we're sitting on a 36.4 people per 100,000 persons in the country that are basically murdered at any one given time, and that is our murder rate, which gives us an account of 21,000 people. Now, we get what we call statistical paralysis. You look at these figures and it's like interesting and wow, that's a big number. But if you really weigh it up and you're looking at 36 people out of every 100,000 people are going to be knocked every year, and that it's going to anywhere between 20 and 30,000 people, and you take them and you stick them into a rugby stadium or two, and you look at how many people that is in a country that is technically not at war, then the bell should start ringing. Guys, there's something wrong. There is something wrong. We do not have law and order anymore.
What you've just said is really the elephant in the room, because if you look at Ukraine, if a civilian is killed in Ukraine, it makes the news. This is by a Russian missile or something like that. And the death rate I'm not talking about the military, I'm talking about civilians, is only 3 or 4 people per day. In South Africa, the murder rate is somewhere it's getting close to 80 per day, apparently.
Yeah. That is, and Scott, if you look at the countries that Honduras, Colombia, these areas that are, let's say, we're trying to go to countries not to create a sensation because of what we may recall from the old sort of Pablo Escobar, Calais cartel type of history. But it's countries that still run with very strong organized criminal gangs, still moving serious narco trafficking authority and power, buying big government positions, and yet they will be substantially lower than what South Africa is.
Doesn't that
And
actually
we're talking
say
the
to
same
you?
time.
Doesn't it actually say to you, Jean, that South Africa falls under the same category now because the SAPS is just overwhelmed by the amount of crime?
Oh, 100%, Scott. You're 100% correct there, because that's why, when in doing this exercise, we were looking at, countries of a similar background. Now, that in itself, if you think about what I'm saying there, is a shocker, because I'm saying, let's look at countries similar to South Africa, equal to narco mafias running in South America. So I've actually just put South Africa smack bang in the middle of that same category. And yet we're beating them hands down by up to 11 persons per 100,000 murdered. I mean,
Well,
you're
that's
looking
Mexico.
at Mexico. Yeah,
And then we've got here Colombia,
yeah.
and then South Africa
Colombia
is
is 25 versus 36.
in South Africa, yeah. Now just take us through this here. This is assassinations in South Africa.
Yes. Right, thanks for that, Scott. Let me just give you and the viewers a bit of background. The reason why I've done this is, it's the old frog in the hot water theory, where, as the water gets warmer, so you don't realize it until you boil. The media, large stream media, as you know, and certain programs you've recently been airing as well, tend to be owned by different power factions within any ruling structure. So you'll get a flash here and you'll get a bit of information there. But when you actually break it down, and what I've done here is, apart from one or two, which I will highlight, I'm talking to you about incidents that happen in a 50k radius of my home.
Wow.
This is stuff that we know, we've seen, we have knowledge of the persons. This is not pie in the sky stuff. This is not something you could have picked up on CNN. And people we're being ostriches right now, by putting that, we're putting our head in the hole. But if we just have a look at what's actually going on, and if I can give you a brief rundown on what's been happening, if we look at it, we really want to do a national survey on this stuff. We'll probably end up clogging the airports with everybody trying to get out. I'm not sure, but if we look at what I'm calling the assassination culture, it's also what I put a few cases in here that are not specific to my area, but it shows the diversity of the clientele for Inkabis. Bobita Deokaran, she actually comes from Chatsworth, our area, but she wasn't shot there, okay? After dropping, we all know the story, she was blowing the whistle on a massive tender fraud, PPE tender fraud, with to do with the COVID in the health department that she was involved with, and that she'd worked her way up over the years into a senior position. They just shot her down in her car, riddled the car with bullets, and that was the end of Babita, just for being an honest citizen, not wanting to waste, wanting to put the money where it belongs. So that's somebody that was just doing their job in a government department, trying to keep a handle on corruption. Her life was basically not worth the effort in terms of the beneficiaries of that corruption. If we move to the next one, Jan 2022, now we start coming into my home turf here. On that day, it was quite interesting. The call-outs came through. There was a shootout at a filling station, and then there was a chase of two cars going down Kingsway, which is one of the major roads in Amamzantoti that runs down along the beach. And they then turned at high speed into a little suburb. It's the old CBD of Toti, where there's a fairly well-established grocery wholesaler now. The victim's car slammed to brakes. He got out and he actually tried to run into the shop for protection. The guys actually followed him into the shop, and they made sure that he never walked out of that shop again. Now, that was 36-year-old Samisa Gumede. The Gumede is very well established, and I would say well known to the point almost of notorious taxi operators in the southern part of Durban. It was one of the Gumede brothers that they just decided it's now time to basically take this guy out, Interesting enough, the two shooters, when they suddenly realized that the police were closer to them what they thought, and it's actually the first time ever, and I'm sure it's happened to other people, but I can only talk to you about in my own experience, one of two Inkabis that actually went and handed themselves over.
Wow.
Actually went to the police and they realized that they're going to be in more trouble on the outside than on the inside, and they actually handed themselves over. And yeah, that was a very interesting one. I don't think we fully heard why or what the objectives were, or who they suddenly realized is a bigger threat outside than inside, or what happened. But yeah, that's the only time I know when Kabis have actually gone and handed themselves over. Then we got October 18, 2022. Again, outside a petrol station, there was a tow truck outfit. The youngster was sitting in the vehicle, and next thing, bang, 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 and that was the end of the person. Found the guy on the driver's side of the car, bullet hole. That was, again, now we know tow trucks come with all sorts of other baggage. Again, no care, no worrying, broad daylight, and that was a. Oh, sorry. I apologize to you. I have my information wrong. This was actually down at the bottom towards the very southern part of Amamzantoti. Sorry, I have my internet crossed. Humble apologies, everybody. A guy drove into town in his bakkie, and he stopped at the filling station, and a vehicle came past him. We pulled this all of the footage, I'm telling you firsthand, and you could see there was a knowledge of who they were. He pulled into the parking facing the building. The other vehicle made a U-turn, and a guy jumped out the back of the van and basically pumped. There was over 50 rounds picked up on that scene, AK-47. 10, 18 in the morning, busy garage. There's a whole little shopping center there. There's a laundromat there. There's a nail parlor. There's all sorts going on. How no civilians were shot there, I have no idea. But again, the driver didn't survive. They just riddled him right there, broad daylight. The next one, October 21, 2022, Mr. Bridgemohan was a councillor. He had finished his term, and he was also a building developer. And in one of the well-known streets in Toti, he was busy doing a development. And what we picked up on the surveillance cameras after the incident, unfortunately, there's nothing much we could do. You see Mr. Bridgemohan, he speaks to somebody, he then walks back towards the property they're developing. You see two guys coming down the road towards him, calling him. He turns, he walks towards them. There seems to be some level of acknowledgement or some level of recognition. They walk right up to this man, Scott. I'm talking about right up there. When the guy lifted his arm, that gun was probably not even 2 centimeters from his head, and they pulled the trigger. Shot him point blank range. Left him lying on his back dying, and they just walked away like they've done nothing. Like they've done absolutely nothing. This is in a well-reputed suburb in Amamzantoti. November 10, 2022. This was an interesting one. We're talking about at about 1700. This is at one of the malls in Toti. Very well-known mall, very well-supported mall. And at that time of day, on the date, the car park was absolutely full, people everywhere. And the specific victim, Mr. Kunene, had obviously done his shopping. You see on the footage again afterwards when we attended the scene. He came out to the vehicle, they put the groceries in the vehicle. He took the trolley to go and park it. And as he turned back, you see this little second vehicle pulls in. Guy jumps out, walks up behind him, 2 point blank into the back of the head. Mr. Kunene falls down. You see the passenger jump out, walk over, and does the coup de grace with I can't remember how many rounds from the AK at point blank range, just to make sure. Again, taxi related, you know. But in such a built-up area, again, how, you know, we haven't had other civilians seriously wounded or killed in this process is just, it's unbelievable.
Have any of these people been arrested, or do they just always get away?
Scott, there are arrests, I have to be honest with you. On some of the more local issues where it's more local guys trying to just get rid of the competition, we are getting arrests. But the very high profile hits, I can honestly tell you, those guys come in as ghosts and they vanish just as fast. Unless you can get to the person that ordered the hit, your chances of actually catching them is zero. If they're in a vehicle, if they get away and we happen to get the call in time and we can jam the roads and we can jam them on the road, and either in a shootout or by submission they get neutralized, then probably you've got them. But if they get away, they're gone.
Wow.
And as we know, a lot of these guys are not locals. They're coming in from other provinces, doing the job and getting out. That's your high-end, really highly skilled, good shooters. They're shooting accurately. They're not wasting rounds. They're deadly, unemotional, and they're gone.
Okay, let's go on to the next one.
All right, that one there of the 31st of March 2023, we talking just the other day. That's at Brandon Puff, Kalicharan and his wife that were killed. They were shot there in Springfield in Durban. And the 9-year-old daughter was in the vehicle. She was also then hit and then died later. Big kingpin. Well-known operator within the, I'm going to call it the gangster world, whatever that includes. And yeah, that created a big stir because they'd obviously gone for the head of the snake, you know. That was the 21st of March. The 24th of March, there were 5 people shot in 3 different drive-by incidents on that Thursday. In Tongaat, they killed 4 people, 2 different shootouts. Same shootout, 400 meters apart. And then in the Mamsentoti Mars stomping ground, it was about 2 in the afternoon, was the owner of a security company that specializes in protection for taxi bosses, was knocked in a drive-by shooting. The female passenger, she managed to walk to the ambulance from the vehicle, bloody head and so forth, but not serious. And the driver of the vehicle was quite seriously shot in about, on the scene, what we could say, 5 to 6 rounds that hit him in the legs, arms and abdomen. But the last information I had, he was actually still alive, so very risky for him. You know. As an update to that, in March 28th, Santaco being the National Taxi Organization, their KZN branch, they then actually admitted that it could be linked to the feud between illegal taxi operators that were recently removed in the Tongaat area. So coming back to that kind of mafia business operating where a life means nothing and Inkabi's flourish. Tuesday, 4 April. Now we're coming closer to our time. Okay, we had the one outside of our area to the south. Again, 2 taxi owners were shot and killed at robots in the Ugu area on the south coast. And again, riddled in bullet holes. Shooters gone. No identification. No one knows who they are. 4th of April, we had the interesting one where the widow of the chief of Mpumalanga, who was murdered last week, was also brutally murdered. So now, why I put that one in, it didn't happen in my area, but we've got the political sphere, you've got the traditional leadership sphere, you've got the organized gang sphere, and you've just got your taxi industry and other mafia type operations where that is your Inkabi stomping ground. That's where they thrive. There is major business for them to pop up anytime. So the guys with the reputation are getting the money, like we've said, for a reasonable target, 40,000 to 1.5 million. For just a, what we call in inverted commas, a para target, you can probably pick it up between 5 to 10,000 rand to take a human life today.
Wow. Okay. Now, look, I just want to look at other industries where there are similar issues happening. And one, for example, is the construction industry, where you've now got these syndicates who go out and they threaten contractors who are building, I think it's mainly government projects. And they go in and they basically want 30% of the contract to make sure that the contract can be completed. In other words, protection money.
Yes.
Does that include Inkabi's as well?
It actually does. And there's 2 levels of that protection money. The one is, as you know, what we call the business mafia, or the construction mafia. These are the guys basically go in, threaten you to use them, to use their staffing, to use their raw material suppliers, or they want a cut of the total project or whatever it is they're asking for. And if they don't get it, then they just prevent the, whatever, let's say it was a mall, they don't allow it to open and so forth. We're having a similar issue not far from us at the moment. The Inkabi is really the key go-to person in all these things, because ultimately none of those guys that are known, the bullies, the guy that stops there, jumps out of his bucky, sticks his finger in your face, really wants to actually get his name linked to anything that goes down in the future. So you'll always see that they're masters of the art of creating that perception of distance and space and not knowing who, what, and where. So your Inkabi, that grey man that's living in the shadows, that gets a target pointed out to him, moves in, does what he has to do, and gets out the area, thrives in that kind of environment, in my experience. Eh? And then you've got your smaller situation that's pretty much the same, which is your protection monies by these same persons, believe it or not, but on your foreign-owned little spaza shops, you know, little container shop and your little tin shop in the townships, have to pay protection money to pretty much the same organizations to prevent them from getting robbed or worse by the same organizations, you know. So it's really an interesting dynamic of business creation through being the threat and the solution to yourself. And there's been people shot, there's been shopkeepers killed, there's been security officers killed, reacting to where these guys come on site to do the bullying and the threatening. So that level of guns for hire, murder for hire, thrives on that sort of small level and, of course, on the high level. The solution today in this country, let's go to the Koya squad. The solution to the problem is, don't waste your time in a civil court. Pay an Inkabi. It's cheaper to come up with 180,000 Rand and get your problem solved than to pay an attorney and an advocate 500,000 Rand and maybe you don't win. That's my opinion for what it's worth today, is fix it at the barrel of a gun. Because it's permanent, it's gone, it's out the way. Anybody that remains within your so-called competitor's environment is going to be far too scared to want to come back and do anything, so it's a win-win. There's a total disregard for life. It happens in broad daylight. No masks, no face coverings, no hats. The guys really don't care if there's cameras or not. It's uncanny at how blatant this is, which lends again a bit of credibility to what we hear about the Muti and the Sangoma side, because a lot of them believe you can't see them and so forth. I'm saying this with respect for the belief of people. I don't necessarily subscribe to that. But it is very hard to combat the element of surprise against a person like that who actually just doesn't care when, where, who, or how. It just happens. Driving down the highway, he comes up from the back, vehicles identified, they just bang the guys and carry on driving. It's that simple.
Yeah. Now, just you mentioned Sangomas, and I understand when it comes to farm attacks and farm murders, and I would suggest a lot of those are by hitmen as well. Is that before they actually go out to do the crime or murder, they go and see a Sangoma, to basically get this muti and this, as you say, they're invisible and so on. And then after they've actually committed the crime and murdered someone, apparently they then go to church to pray for forgiveness. Do you have any comments on this process?
I actually do, again, first-hand experience in the sort of 2009 to 2015 period. I was involved in the Limpopo province with various organizations combating poaching and so forth. And there we met very, very strong evidence of these guys first going to the witch doctor for the blessing. They go and get washed, is the term they use. They do the whatever rituals the witch doctor prescribes. They will then actually attach certain kinds of mutis to themselves, muti being the generic word for some kind of magic potion. What I've visibly experienced and seen is I've had like a normal thin plastic packet like they used to issue at your retail stores, a strip of that cut with some tar-like substance, normally quite pungent smelling, so I wouldn't like to do the tongue test on what it is. Basically strapped around the guy's bicep, the string around the waist. You'd find it wrapped in, really strange looking substances, wrapped in newspaper in the bottom of a bag, and that is known as muti, or it was, like we were saying, your traditional protection that is coming from, the old word was witch doctor. We now politically correct say it's the sangoma or the traditional healer. But for any international viewers that might be out there tonight, this is pretty much the old, what they call African religion, where the people will attend to the traditional magic that they would go to for protection. And then the promises that are actually being made, Scott, by these sangomas or witch doctors, as they were known of old, is that the bullets will turn to water, that the suspect is invisible, he won't be able to be seen. It's phenomenal. I've actually physically been on scenes with poachers, specifically rhino poachers, where the guy's caught and he's astounded. He says, "But how could you see me? How could you see me?" It's like, how could I miss you, chap? They couldn't believe that they'd been spotted. They had such a blind belief into this traditional
witchcraft.
Yeah. That they paid normally a lot of money for. So the thing with this is your sangoma, the more success he has, be it by default or whatever other forces he may have access to, whatever groups tend to be more protected, have more success, his reputation keeps going up, and so does the price. And we've had a recent incident in my hometown on the south coast of KwaZulu-Natal, where a well-reputed sangoma, there was a hit on his life. And it was, I couldn't quite understand how this works. And then speaking to the Zulu guys that I work with and that they were explaining to me, we need to understand that this man, his muti, as they call it, or his witchcraft, is seen to be extremely strong. So the enemies of his enemies, that were trying to get some sort of victories, felt that it was now necessary to take this guy out so that the people could no longer have access to his powerful medicine, if you want to call it that. So it becomes a real circle of intrigue as to why, who, and where. But the availability of fully automatic AK-47s and these kind of military weapons is phenomenal. And even in South Africa, that has a really strict gun law, and I believe a well managed, if it's not corrupted, system of licensing of private firearms and so forth. As a fully automatic AK-47 remains a weapon of war. It is not legal. Only the military may use and issue that. No civilian may own a fully automatic weapon. And yet when they're caught, you'll find that that's never on the docket. That it'll be a legal firearm or this or that, but they won't actually go to, in the old days, we could actually charge them a weapon of war and possibly even terrorism, because if it was a foreigner with a fully automatic on South African soil, there was all sorts of other things he would face. That's all fallen by the wayside now. You get a rap on the knuckles, or the best one is, you're a foreigner, you come in, you do the stunt, and then you get bail and you skip the border and we never see you again. I mean, it's just beautiful.
That's absolutely crazy. Now, you've just touched on guns, and obviously one of the big issues is the availability of guns and ammunition to the Inkabi. And apparently over 20,000 guns, including semi-automatic rifles, have gone missing from the South African Police Service, and we're talking also millions of rounds. Don't you think that is probably the main source of the weapons that are used by these gangs and syndicates and hitmen all around South Africa?
Scott, if I go out on the figures, because you must remember there's a lot of defensive propaganda coming in from government departments where they could potentially be linked to this kind of thing. So you got to be careful what you put out there as fact, because we're working on a lot of hearsay and on the odd sort of investigative journalist that seems that they have something. But if we go to the facts and we look at the people that have been physically arrested now and charged by IPID and other sectors of the South African policing structure, There was that one man alone that was being investigated at the time that Falconeer got shot. He was alone answerable for something over 16,000 firearms that were taken in by SAPS and then leaked back into the organized crime structures. I mean, that's one man.
Wow.
So if you look at those sort of numbers, it's like anything is possible. But when we start looking at the fully automatics and it, we have found it's getting far less. You still come across the old R1 type of weapon, which was the old SADF issue, which may even still have its number on, guns that went missing at the time of the political change, or with the disbanding of, the commandos and so forth that got missing. But that is extremely rare. The main weaponry that we're picking up today on the streets is either SAPS or military type R5.
Yeah,
R4.
I was about to say the R4 and R5 apparently are now being found.
And they're marked, and they've got the police stamp on. Handguns, plenty plus. Z88's SAP issue. The AKs potentially as leaked in from the old sort of military handover at the time of 1994 and so forth. Because there's a big mix of AKs. There's original Russian, there's Chinese AKs, but fully automatic weapons should never be in the country. We know for a fact from other weapons that were smuggling, I'm going back now probably 7-8 years, were coming through Mozambique straight into South Africa. A lot of ammunition was being found, AK ammunition, still in the old fish tins as we call them, and it was sealed in a can like fish. And they lost forever inside there. So I think our neighboring states, quite a bit of weapons has actually come through from there, where these guys are coming through for other purposes. And it's just created a market, for them to run with it. But as I say, with my experience for what it's worth, I've never experienced such a constant and prolific, specifically just this sort of gang shooting at night, automatic weapons, shooting out whole magazines of 9mm, because although the guns were there, the rounds, the ammunition was always the restricted factor. That seems to have changed, and that's worrying me, because you can have all the guns in the world. If you've got nothing in that gun to go bang, it's not worth much to you. But the availability of ammo to just walk around at night, just banging these things off into the air and knowing you got more where that came from, that is my major concern. I'm talking to you on a personal level now, is what has changed in the dynamic of ammunition.
Yeah, and clearly there's no fear of apprehension by the syndicates and the people involved, because the SAPS, I've heard where they're called to investigate, they just say, oh no, we're not even going to come out, because they're just not interested. It's absolutely terrible. Now, one of the things that we haven't really touched on is collateral damage. In other words, when the Inkabi go out, they take someone out, they really don't care if someone else gets hurt in the meantime, do they?
No, I think, this is why I say the other concern I have over and above the available ammunition is where are they finding the skills, because, even if you take that shooting I referred to earlier at that mall, there was a round that hit a parked car and so forth, but they contained their shooting to basically between the air and the road, and the smaller caliber shooting towards sort of left to right. So these guys, they're not untrained, really handy with the weapons. They point in the right direction. Your biggest risk is ricochet, angles, walls, roads, and so forth, but they always point in the direction of a dead end. If you get these guys driving past on a highway at 120, 130 kilometers an hour, and you look at their grouping, and when I'm talking about the grouping is the ring around the holes, if you want to call it that, into the window or the door that these guys have let rip at a moving target from a moving target. These guys are no fools. Now, in one of the interviews that was allegedly conducted by one of the national broadcasting bodies, talking to these Inkabis are alleging they go for training and they go for this and they go for that. Now, what shocks me is people will read that or hear that. The first thing that flares up in my mind is training. Where the hell are you training? To train like that, hey, where are you getting the guns? Where are you getting the opportunity? Who is training you to be able to shoot moving target, standing target, walking target? That is military tactical shooting, Scott. That's not shooting away at a 5-meter piece of paper in a shooting range. So nobody asked the question, sorry, training, where are you training? Who's training you? That goes by the wayside. They also put out a lot of nonsense where they talk about, and I'm digressing a bit slowly, but you'll see where I'm coming to, is of saying that at the to identify their target, they'll be told, right, they want to take out Mr. or Mrs. X. Then they'll spend months doing surveillance and they'll hack their phones and they'll do this and they'll do that. That's rubbish. By the time that Inkabi gets called, they know exactly who the victim is. They've got all the dope on him. And 9 times out of 10, we have found that money has changed hands because it's the biggest motivator on the ground in somebody in the enemy camp and somebody that wants them dead. It's that simple. They do not spend months investigating and hacking and all this rubbish. It's a sellout from day one. Okay. The second thing is we need to know who are these guys with those skills. As I've said earlier, those skills, access to those weapons, and nobody's asking, where have you been trained? What is your background? What military personnel are out there? What ex-special forces people are out there? What old task force, South African police task force members are out there? National intervention unit guys that are disillusioned because it didn't work for them. They never got their money, whatever, it doesn't matter. Or they just felt that Crown pays better than the state. Nobody's looking there, yet it's popping up. In 2 incidents we've had where one guy was actually an instructor in the task force that tried to rob somebody.
Wow.
And there was another one where the guy and the wife that were involved actually came from the NIU training division in Mariannhill. So, once is an interesting thing. 2 is like, wow, by the time we get to 3rd and 4th one, there's no such thing as coincidence anymore. Yeah. There is a pool and a resource of highly skilled, highly trained people that are disillusioned, unemployed or whatever, that are quite happy to do whatever they have to do for the money that it's going to pay them.
Now, we've talked about money and a lot of money exchanging hands. What happens if the Inkabi fails in his objective of taking someone out? What happens? Does the person who's paid him get his money back, or does that person then get another Inkabi to take out the Inkabi who didn't take out the guy he was supposed to take out? What's the sort of process there?
It's basically all of the above, as you would say in a multiple choice type of test. Normally that's why the good Inkabi comes in, he does his job and he goes. We've actually come across where shooters have been killed because they didn't achieve their goal. New guys are then appointed that have to come in and finish it. Or they come back because they weren't paid and they come back for revenge. So all of those scenarios do happen. They really do happen. So it's probably the worst case scenario for an Inkabi is to miss his target and to fail in his mission, because then the deal's kind of off. They normally get a cut up front and then they get the balance on completion. That's sort of open to whoever's negotiating what with who. But it pretty much goes south after that. And that's why a lot of them just get the hell out of Dodge and you can't find them again after the shooting. Right. Because it's not just then law enforcement that's looking for them. It can be their own fellows looking for them as well.
Right. Now look, I'm going to wrap up this live stream shortly, Eugene, but before I do, there are a couple of things. Firstly, I'd like you to just perhaps make a closing statement about your experience with the Inkabi. But we have a resident pastor at Loving Life TV. His name's Dan Berryman. And Dan is in our side chat, and if you would like, I can get Dan in on Skype to say a prayer for your father. It's up to you.
No, so Scott, that is actually quite touching. Thank you very much for that.
All right.
Yeah, he's not doing too well as we speak. Yeah, but yeah, he's an old man. He's had an interesting life, but it's never good to see a great man fade away.
Yeah.
Yeah, if I can come back to your first request
Yeah,
on,
go ahead.
of an Inkabi.
Yeah.
The taking of a human life is something that should be always a last resort in any man or woman's life. That should never be something that is taken lightly. So, in my experience, the level of I would almost say the psychopathic lack of conscience on such a large group of people shows that we have a really sick society that are actually attracted to this kind of profession, to go around and for money to actually kill. And yeah, I've also seen what you referred to earlier, where we know that they would still go and consult the ancestors, as we call it, or go and consult the witch doctor or the ancestors through the witch doctor. It all runs hand in hand. And then afterwards, they would turn to what we would call modern faith structures, be it mainly Christian or whatever, as very zealot type of members of the parish, praying and seeking forgiveness for what they've done. So it's a incredibly confusing level of mentality that prevails amongst these people. I've had the experience of assisting to. It's an interesting. I don't want to go into the details, but because of the sensitivity of it, a number of us were called to basically assist an investigator to move an Inkabi and certain evidence to a safe area because the township he'd been arrested in was unsafe for him to be there. And had a short time to actually sit in while he was being interviewed. And to see this guy physically and to just, observe things like his physical structure, his hands, your normal soldier, your guy that's operated in the bush tends to have quite rugged hands, tends to have, scoring, they got the classic piece of thumb missing out from endless training with a safety catch on a pistol or whatever. And what struck me with this man was his actual level of sophistication. His knowledge of languages was phenomenal. He was actually quite a soft build, nothing sporty, no muscles, and he actually had feminine hands. And yet, according to the information and the persons that we had assisted, we were talking to one of the most prolific Inkabis in the area.
Wow.
So it was, we tend to, in our minds, we build this profile of what we think this guy would be, running around in loinskins, living on a millicob and stabbing people at random or whatever. The modern day Inkabi is nobody's fool. He understands the system. He normally has been imprisoned somewhere in his life. So he's been through the judicial system. He's learned a lot from it. He knows how to play it. He knows how to create doubt to keep himself safe. Wherever they are getting the opportunity to actually become so proficient with these weapons is something that I'm really busy looking into and seeing where this could actually be taking place or where they've actually come from that they have that proficiency. And then, that the emotional side where on the one hand they're quite happy to kill for a few rands, but then on the other hand they're seeking penance and praying for protection to two sides of the spiritual spectrum, if you want to call it that.
Yeah.
So it's incredibly complex to profile an Inkabi, but it all just comes down to the end of the day, almost a psychopathic greed of I'm happy to kill if the money's right.
Yeah.
I feel nothing for nobody, How much of that the country's history has brought about, how much of that poverty, how much of that just, I don't want to go into that. I'm not a psychiatrist or a psychologist per se, but it's, to me, abnormal in a country that has not grown through the same challenges of a narco-mafia, for example, should actually be worse than countries that have grown through that culture. There's something very wrong.
Right. Now, Eugene, I'm going to get Dan in on Skype to join this discussion, just so he can say a prayer for your father before we wrap up this live stream.
Appreciate that. Thank you, sir.
Sorry, I've just got to get his name right here. There we go.
Okay.
Okay. I'm going to add Dan into the call. Dan comes. Now, Dan, just for the record, is in Port Elizabeth, and I think he's coming through. I can see he's should be calling him now. Dan, are you getting... Oh, here we go. Here he comes.
Okay.
Hi, Dan. Are you there? Oh, there he is.
Hi, Scott. Yes. On the screen,
Okay.
or hear me at this stage?
We can hear you perfectly. Dan, meet Eugene.
Great.
Nice to meet
Hello,
you, Dan.
Eugene. Thank you for a very, very interesting talk.
No, thank you, sir. Thank you for the opportunity.
And Dan, you're going to
Thank
say...
you.
You're going to say a prayer and perhaps say some words to Eugene, whose father is not in a good place. Over to you.
Okay. Thanks, Scott. Eugene, sorry, can I just ask you, what is your dad's name?
His name is John Engelbrecht.
John.
Yes, sir.
Okay. Eugene, just let's focus on some words out of Romans chapter 8, just before we start our prayer. And I'm just reading to you. It says, I am sure that neither death nor life, nor angels, nor principalities, nor things present, nor things to come, nor powers, nor height, nor depth, nor anything else in all creation will be able to separate us from the love of God in Christ Jesus our Lord. And so I would, bearing those words in mind, I would just like to you to join me in this short prayer, and all the folks that are still with us on Loving Life. Faithful Father and most merciful Saviour, we commend into your hands our dear brother John, Eugene's father. May he know that he is precious in your sight. Wash him in the blood of the Lamb, who was slain to take away the sins of the world. Purge him of all defilement, that he may be presented pure and spotless in your sight, through the merits of Jesus Christ, your only Son, our Lord. Oh, Father, each and every single one of us is on a journey through life, and for each and every single one of us, there will be a time of closure when we depart this earth. And so we bring to you John today, at this time, as he prepares to make this journey, as he leaves behind the things that he is familiar with and that he knows, and that he stares into a future place that at this stage is unknown. And so he probably feels a little bit weary about it. Lord, we just commit him to you, and we pray that you may remove from his heart any fear, any concern, knowing that as he trusts in Christ for his salvation, so his salvation will be. We pray for the family who remain behind. We pray for those who will soon be grieving his passing and mourning his memory. And we just ask, Father, that you may be their comfort, and that they may have a sense and a knowing that your blessed hands surround them. We ask that all in Jesus' precious name. Amen.
Amen.
Thank you so much. For words, I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Dan.
A great pleasure, my friend. Thank you, Scott.
Okay.
Good night.
Take care, Dan. Bye.
Bye, Dan. Appreciate you joining us.
Thank you.
Okay, Eugene, I'm going to wrap up the live stream now. And once again, thank you so much for sharing your knowledge with us. And, this is a subject you know a lot about. And look, we will be praying for your dad. And yeah, look, it's going to be a tough Easter for you, but just know that the Loving Life family have your dad in their thought and prayers.
Well, thank you. That means a lot. Really appreciate it.
Okay then. Take care. Bye for now.
Have a good evening, everybody. Bye-bye.
All right, guys, that was Eugene Engelbrecht, and we were talking about hitmen in South Africa, and this is a sacred weekend. It is Easter weekend, so please, in your prayers and your thoughts, please hold John Engelbrecht in your prayers. All right, guys, I'm going to wrap this up, and I'm going to go out with, let me have a look. I think we'll go out with Op ons rots, because that's probably more relevant to this time. Here we go. Op ons rots. Have a great evening, everybody, and don't forget, Monday at 8 p.m. Johannesburg time, we have our next live stream. Bye for now.
Ons loop hand aan hand op goue warm sand, so baie wat ek wil hê, so baie dit brand. Ek staan op my rots met golwe wat bots. Ons het geen vrees, want hy is in beheer. Ons sien al die planne van goddeloze manne. Ons weet hulle gaan nie wen nie, dis geskryf soos 'n duif. Ons sal wen, aanhou glo, want hy is in beheer. Waai sterk, dis kragte wat werk. Die gevoel in my hart, dis vrees wat wil brand. Ons is boere met trots, met my hand teen my bors. Ons ken geen vrees, want hy is in beheer. Ons sien al die planne van goddeloze manne. Ons weet hulle gaan nie wen nie, dis geskryf soos 'n duif. Ons sal wen, aanhou glo, want hy is in beheer. Ons sien wat gebeur, die leuen sal ons nie steen. Kom slaan nog 'n keer, ek is stil, want ek weet hy is in beheer. Ons sien al die planne van goddeloze manne. Ons weet hulle gaan nie wen nie, dis geskryf soos 'n duif. Ons sal wen, aanhou glo, want hy is in beheer. Ons sien al die planne van goddeloze manne. Ons weet hulle gaan nie wen nie, dis geskryf soos 'n duif. Ons sal wen, aanhou glo, want hy is in beheer.